Hello everyone. Good afternoon. Hello guys, am I audible? Okay, cool. So yesterday we went through why we have to document test case, when we have to document test case, and few test case design technique, error guessing, and boundary value analysis. What is test case design technique? These are the techniques which helps you derive scenario. Whatever is basically the basic scenarios, whatever needs to be tested. And apart from that, we do have error guessing. Error guessing is basically trying to guess all the possible errors or all the possible data which needs to be entered by just guessing it. And depending upon the requirement, intuition, and your experience. Second one is boundary value analysis. Boundary value analysis says that you need to test the application. You need to test the test the application with the a minus 1 and a plus 1, the lower value minus 1 and lower value plus 1 data, and upper value minus 1 and upper value plus 1 data. If your requirement is in ranges, then you can apply BVA, boundary value analysis. Whenever you see that your requirement is in ranges, you can apply this technique and try to test with a minus 1, a plus 1, b minus 1 and b plus 1, where a is the lower range and b is the higher range. Okay, any questions in this, any doubts?
No, sir.
Let's move on to third one. Now third one is basically your equivalence partitioning. Now there is a hard rule, there is a hardcore rule in equivalence partitioning. It says that if your input, any kind of input, if your input, you have a requirement, you have an input, there could be any kind of input. It could be a single data, it could be a range of values, it could be a boolean yes or no kind of, you either select one data, male or female, like in radio. But any kind of input you give, you have to test with one valid and two invalid. This is the hard and fast rule of the equivalence partitioning. Equivalence partitioning says that whenever you are trying to test the data, make sure, test any component, make sure you are testing with one valid and two invalid data. It is not specified which particular valid or which exactly invalid, from where valid, from where invalid. Valid obviously within the requirement which is mentioned, and invalid outside the requirement. But specifically it is not being called out from where you have to put the invalid data. Is it from the like if it is in ranges, is it from the lower range side, upper range side, one lower range, one upper range? Nothing has been mentioned there. Okay, so this is a hard and fast rule of basically your equivalence partitioning. Now under equivalence partitioning, I told you that there are two people. First one is practice, another one is Prisman. So practice says we do have different type of inputs. Okay, we do have different type of inputs. So in that particular type of input, you need to put on the data in different way and try to test. But the rule remains same: test with one valid and two invalid. If it is saying that it is a range of value, as you can see it here, right? Range of values. If the input in the range of values, derive the test case in such a way, derive the scenario in such a way, you are testing for one valid and two invalid. You can see this in diagram, right? This is saying that there is an age text field, requirement is 5 to 55. Now according to this rule, we need to test with one valid and two invalid. According to Prisman, he's saying whenever the requirement is in range, then test with one valid data and two invalid data. One valid could be anything between 5 to 55, which could be 4, 25, 26, something like that. So we picked 4. And two invalid, we picked 40. So
Valid 40.
valid 40 and
Invalid
invalid
4.
4, right? So basically 5 to 55, anything valid could be in between this. So valid would be 40 and invalid would be 4 and 67. Now here in this particular concept, Prisman didn't specify from where you have to pick the invalid data, correct? So if you are picking up 67 and the requirement says the boundary value is 55, the higher range is 55. So if there is a defect, if this particular text field is accepting 56 or 57 and you are just testing with 67, will you be able to catch that defect? If there is a defect, while developing this text field, they have given the higher range as 60, let's suppose 60, and you are just testing with 44 and 67, will you be able to catch this defect?
Yes, sir.
No.
Yes, sir.
How would you catch? If they have done the mistake, they have written 60 as a higher range in the coding of this particular text field, and you are testing with 67, how will you catch that 60 is a defect here if you're not even putting that data? Getting my point?
Sir, if 60 is the highest value, then we are taking one
67.
minimum value.
You're taking 67.
Only
test it.
67.
For example, I'm saying that if you are taking that 4, 40 and 67, requirement
Yes,
says
sir.
it should be 5 to 55. Developer did a mistake. He have given the range from 5 to 60 mistakenly. Original requirement is 55 and you are just trying to test with 67. Will you be able to catch that defect that 60 is getting accepted?
No, sir.
Obviously you will not get it, right? The
No.
moral of the story is that whenever you are picking up the invalid data here, you are not specifying, the concept is not specifying from where the data needs to be picked. Irrespective to that, unlike to that boundary value analysis is exactly telling you that you have to take the invalid from just after and before than the lower range and higher range, correct? So the chances of getting the bug in the range kind of a requirement will be higher in boundary value analysis, lower in this particular concept, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure, I can repeat. The concept is saying the throughout no equivalence partitioning the concept, the core concept will be same. Test with one valid and two invalid. Okay, it will remain same. Test with one valid and two invalid data. Okay, now there are certain types of input. There could be a range of value wherein you have to give a particular data within the range, then it will be a valid data, and other thing will be invalid. Like for an example, 5 to 55. Anything under 5 to 55 will be valid data. Anything after and before 55, after 55 and before 5 will be invalid data. Correct. So this creates a range. This is the range. Under range, it will be a valid, and out of the range, it will be an invalid. Now, whenever the input is basically of this type, you have to test with one valid and two invalid data. One valid is basically anything in between this range. For an example, 40. Invalid will be anything out of this range. For an example, 4 and 67. It is not specified from where to pick this invalid data. Is it? It's not saying that it should be just before then 5 and after then 55. It is not specified anywhere, right? 10 digits before then this, 10 digits after then this. Anything you can pick. It is not saying that this is the position of the invalid data. So because of that, the tester might pick any data. So we are picking this 4 and 67. Now, for an example, that the original requirement is the higher range should be 55. The developer has done the mistake and given the higher range as a 60. Now, if you give 60 also as age or 55 also as age, it will get accepted, correct? Because developer has done the coding like that, isn't
Yes,
it?
sir. Yes,
So
sir.
the problem is that with this concept, chances are high when you give random invalid data, you might miss some of the defects within the range, which is accepting out of the range, or you are not catching that because you have picked variety of data, invalid data from a far away from the basically your range value. Getting my point? Now is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Who is that? Namrata, is it clear? Cool. So there is a problem. So I would recommend you to, whenever there is a range kind of requirement, better to go with boundary value analysis than rather than this. Even though there is one more problem, it is not specifying from which area you need to pick the invalid data. We have picked from both areas, right? We have picked before 5 and we have picked after 55. You can pick basically any data. So there might be chances the tester might pick any data like 58 and 67. Now the before 5 range will not get tested, right? So basically it is not, the main problem is that it is not specified from where to pick the valid data and invalid data. That's the major problem, major challenge in here, right? Then comes types, another type of input, which is set of values. Set of values is basically what? Set of values is when you have a dedicated set of values. You can see that, right? 15, 19, 45 and 30, 34. These are the IDs of the product, and if you give this ID, search the product, you'll get the product. Basically this is the functionality of your software. Now if this is the kind of input wherein you have a valid set of data, right? Whenever you are going to vote, you can either type BJP, you can either type Congress, you can either type AAP, you can either type BSP. So similarly, you can just type the party name. So there are certain set of party name which the software can accept. Rather than that, if you type your own name, it will be invalid data. Getting my point? So if this is the functionality wherein whatever you are typing, that should be the valid data should be of set of values, and if you are picking any data from that particular set of values, that would be your valid data. Any data after the set of values will be a invalid data. So here also the concept remains the same. The Prisman is saying that whenever you have got a set of values, test with one valid, any valid from here, and two invalid, two invalid from out of this particular set of values, right? So we have picked 18 as invalid as it is not there in the set of values, 15 as valid. This is the valid data because this is for printer, and 89 as invalid data. Got it? Yes, no, even?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Cool. Then comes radio button. Radio button is easier to understand comparatively. So this particular components accept either true or false value, right? If you select male, male will return true, female will return false. If you select female, female will return true, male will return false, because we have selected and we have we might deselect it. So either it returns true value or returns false value to the backend, basically to the server. So the basic idea is that whenever there is this kind of input wherein you can just give the boolean values either true or false, it is saying that Prisman is saying test for both true and false value. Try to select male ones, you are returning true for the male and false for the female. Try to select female, then you are returning false for the male and true for the female. So this way you test both ways, both true and both false. Then there is one more thing which I've taught you while testing, while doing the functionality testing, that we have to consider all the component, both the components as one component. Just for an example, we try to give true value for this component, so we need to select both and we need to leave both blank. So we need to test with that perspective. User is not able to select both, and if user is leaving blank, what should be the behavior? Okay, got it?
Yes, sir.
What about others? What about
Yes,
others?
sir.
Getting right? Cool. So this is all about Prisman said that yeah, there are three types of input. First one is range of values, test for one valid and two invalid. There is set of values, test for one valid and two invalid. There is a nothing but your radio buttons, yeah, basically your boolean value type of input, test for both true and false values. Now practice say whatever Prisman say is correct, but what if the range has a deviation? What if the range has a deviation? Deviation means what? In different parts of range, the behavior of software is different. For an example, there is a range, a ATM can accept 100 to 5,000. Okay, an ATM can accept 100 to 5,000. So whenever you are transferring an amount or you're doing the transaction, if you are entering 100 to 1,000, it is charging you 0% interest. If you are basically entering 1,001 to 2,000, it is charging 1% of interest. If you are entering more than 2,000, basically 2,000 to 5,000, it will charge you basically 2% of interest. It will deduct from your amount. So the basic idea is that there is a range. Definitely this is the range, full-fledged range of 100 to 5,000, which is a valid data. But under that range there will be sub ranges, and basically under that sub ranges the behavior of the software is different. So as the behavior varies, as there is a deviation in the ranges, we need to test individual behavior also. So for that practice gives a solution, because Prisman तो यही बोल रहा था कि check test for one valid and two invalid, right? Wherever there is a range, test for one valid and two invalid. So anything according to Prisman, anything I pick from this will be one valid, and out of this will be invalid. I picked 1,500. I tested this behavior, deducting 1%. Onto invalid 99 and 5,000 and 500. So I tested out of this, right? Basically out of this range. But what about checking the 0% deduction, and what about checking the 2% deduction? That is not happening, correct?
Yes, sir.
So to solve this particular problem, Prisman says divide the range in equal parts. Whatever range you have, 100 to 5,000, divide it in equal parts and test with one valid and two invalid. Check one valid from either from here and two invalid. Check one valid from here, two invalid. Check one valid from here, two invalid. Getting my point? So divide the range in equal parts. That's why it is called as equivalence partitioning. When you partition the range in equal parts, like you can see it here, right? There is a 1,000 interval in every range. It is in equal parts, and basically after that we are testing with one valid and two invalid with that. Okay.
प्लीज और एक बार।
हाँ, तो देखो इक्विवेलेंस, देखो प्रैक्टिस क्या बोलता है, प्रिस्मन जो भी बोल रहा है वो सही बोल रहा है, ठीक है, कि तुम जब भी रेंज होता है चेक करो वन वैलिड और टू इनवैलिड को, ठीक है। दिस इज प्रैक्टिस इज आल्सो सेइंग, प्रैक्टिस बोल रहा है कि ठीक है प्रिस्मन ने जो बोला वो सही है, बट जब तुम्हारे सॉफ्टवेयर की रेंज में डेविएशन आता हो, डेविएशन का मतलब क्या होता है, एक मोमेंटम पे चलते चलते थोड़ा राइट या लेफ्ट जाने को डेविएशन बोलते हैं, करेक्ट। जब तुम एक रेंज के अंदर डेविएशन देखो कि अलग अलग पार्ट ऑफ रेंज में सॉफ्टवेयर का डायरेक्शन अलग अलग है या बिहेवियर अलग अलग है, देखो यहाँ पर ये रिक्वायरमेंट क्या बोल रहा है, रिक्वायरमेंट बोल रहा है जब भी कोई पर्सन 100 टू 1000, देखो सबसे पहले तो ये समझ लो कि पूरा रेंज वैलिड रेंज क्या है, पूरा वैलिड रेंज है 100 से लेके 5000 तक, करेक्ट। इनमें से कुछ भी डालोगे वो एटीएम एक्सेप्ट करेगा, वो नहीं बोलेगा कि इनवैलिड अमाउंट है, करेक्ट, समझ रहे हो। तो
Yes,
अब जब तुम डेटा डाल रहे हो तो एटीएम का बिहेवियर अलग अलग रेंज के अंदर एक अलग अलग सब रेंज है, उसके उसके बेसिस पे एटीएम का बिहेवियर जो हो रहा है, सॉफ्टवेयर का बिहेवियर जो एटीएम के अंदर है उसका जो हो रहा है वो डिफरेंट हो रहा है। जब भी तुम 100 से लेके 1000 के बीच का अमाउंट डालते हो, 500, 800, 900, तो 0% इंटरेस्ट वो सॉफ्टवेयर चार्ज कर रहा है तुमको। जब भी तुम 1001 से लेके 2000 डाल रहे हो तो 1% इंटरेस्ट चार्ज कर रहा है वो तुमको। जब भी तुम 2001 से लेके 5000 तक डाल रहे हो तो 2% इंटरेस्ट चार्ज कर रहा है वो तुमको, समझ रहे हो। तो जब भी तुम ये डेविएशन देखो रेंज पे, तब तुम्हारा जो प्रैक्टिस वाला कॉन्सेप्ट है वो काम आएगा। ठीक है, कैसे काम आएगा? प्रैक्टिस बोल रहा है ये रेंज को डिवाइड करो इक्वल पार्ट में, जो तुम्हारा पूरा रेंज था ना 1100 से लेके 5000 तक, इसको इक्वल पार्ट्स में डिवाइड करो और फिर टेस्ट करो with one valid and two invalid. Let me give you an example. देखो ये कोड हुआ होगा कुछ इस तरीके से, अगर अमाउंट इफ अमाउंट इज 100 to 1000 0% डिडक्शन होगा और ट्रांसफर हो जाएगा, एल्स अमाउंट अगर इधर से लेके इधर तक होगा 1% होगा और ट्रांसफर हो जाएगा, एल्स अगर यहाँ से 2001 से 5000 होगा 2% होगा और ट्रांसफर हो जाएगा, और फिर बाकी सब क्या हो जाएगा? इनवैलिड हो जाएगा, इनवैलिड अमाउंट हो जाएगा। करेक्ट? तो अभी जब तुम एक वैलिड सिर्फ प्रेसमेंट के हिसाब से देखोगे, प्रेसमेंट ने क्या बोला था, पहले वाले बंदे ने क्या बोला था कि एक वैलिड उठा लो इस पूरी रेंज में से और दो इनवैलिड उठा लो। हमने एक वैलिड उठा लिया, लेट्स से 2500। तो ये अगर मैं 2500 डालता हूँ अमाउंट, तो कौन सा कोड एग्जीक्यूट होता है? ये वाला पार्ट एग्जीक्यूट होता है, क्योंकि रेंज इसके अंदर है, 2001 से 5000 के अंदर है। ये यहाँ गया, 2% डिडक्ट हुआ और बेसिकली ट्रांसफर हो गया। हमने टेस्ट कर लिया ये, करेक्ट? और दो इनवैलिड से टेस्ट कर लिया। दो इनवैलिड कुड बी एनीथिंग, 900 नहीं 99 99 इज अ इनवैलिड एंड 5500 इज एन इनवैलिड। जब दो इनवैलिड डाला तुमने, वो किसको एग्जीक्यूट किया? इसको एग्जीक्यूट किया। करेक्ट? इनवैलिड अमाउंट आया तुमको, बट ये वाला पार्ट और ये वाला पार्ट तो एग्जीक्यूट करके तुमने टेस्ट किया ही नहीं। समझ रहे हो? ये वाला पार्ट नहीं टेस्ट हुआ, ये वाला पार्ट नहीं टेस्ट हुआ। तो प्रिसमन बोल रहा है रेंज को पूरा इक्वल पार्ट में डिवाइड करो एंड वो रेंज पे तुम वन वैलिड और टू इनवैलिड लगा के टेस्ट करो। समझ रहे हो? तो ये पहला रेंज हो गया। ये पहले रेंज के अंदर वो वन वैलिड लगाएगा 1050 एंड सॉरी 150 एंड ये 0% डिडक्शन चेक हो जाएगा। जो इनवैलिड लगाएगा 99 और 1000 से ऊपर। तो ये इस पर्टिकुलर रेंज के लिए इनवैलिड होगा, लेकिन इसके लिए वैलिड होगा। समझ रहे हो? तो यहाँ पर तुम रिपीटेड टेस्टिंग करोगे तो उस चीज के लिए तुमको थोड़ा ऑप्टिमाइज करना पड़ेगा। अगर मैं सिनेरियो डिराइव कर रहा हूँ यहाँ पर बैठ के, कौन कौन से डेटा से मेरे को टेस्ट करना है, तो पहला डेटा मैं पहली रेंज के लिए ले लूंगा इनवैलिड 99 एंड देन वैलिड 150 एंड देन अपर रेंज के लिए इनवैलिड 1500। अब देखो ये मेरे अपर रेंज के लिए इनवैलिड है, लेकिन लोअर इसके बाद वाली रेंज के लोअर रेंज के लिए बेसिकली लोअर रेंज डेटा के लिए लोअर वैल्यू डेटा के लिए वैलिड डेटा है, क्योंकि ये बोल रहा है 1001 से लेकर 2000 तक एनीथिंग इज वैलिड। तो अगर मैं दूसरी वाली रेंज के लिए डिराइव करता हूँ, तो मैं यहाँ पर डिराइव करता हूँ 999 और बेसिकली तुम्हारा 1500 अगेन। यहाँ पर मेरे लिए वैलिड जो है वो 1500 है, और यहाँ पर बेसिकली इनवैलिड के लिए मैं ले लेता हूँ 2100। तो अभी देखो ये पर्टिकुलर इसका इनवैलिड इसका वैलिड हो रहा है, ये इसका इनवैलिड इसका वैलिड हो रहा है कि नहीं हो रहा है?
Yes, sir. No, sir.
देखो ना यार, 999 अगर मैं सेकंड रेंज के हिसाब से इनवैलिड डालता हूँ तो इसके लिए वैलिड हो रहा है वो,
Yes,
इसलिए
sir.
रेंज पे आ रहा है। तो बेसिक आइडिया इज दैट यू need to optimize your scenarios first when you derive it first of all you derive it then optimize कि देखो यहाँ पर मैंने इसके लिए वैलिड टेस्ट कर लिया है, तो ये मेरे को डालने की जरूरत ही नहीं है, इसका
Yes,
इनवैलिड
sir.
डालने की जरूरत नहीं है। यहाँ पर मैंने ये इसकी इनवैलिड डाल दिया, तो इसका वैलिड डालने की जरूरत ही नहीं है, तो ये टेस्ट हो गया। समझ रहे हो? ऐसे करके ऑप्टिमाइज करना पड़ेगा तुमको, कहाँ पर जरूरत है कहाँ पर जरूरत नहीं है, तुमको थोड़ा देखना पड़ेगा, उसके बाद तुम टेस्ट केस लिखोगे। गॉट इट
Yes, sir.
एवरीवन?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
cool, let's take another topic। इसमें कोई क्वेश्चंस? टेस्ट केस डिजाइन टेक्निक तीन ही थी, यही है बस, और कुछ क्वेश्चंस इस पे?
No.
No,
सबको
sir.
समझ में आ गया? इजी है वैसे। ये इतना बेसिकली ये इतना काम नहीं आता है ये, जब जब तुम बेसिकली टेस्ट केस डिजाइन करते हो, इक्विवेलेंस पार्टीशनिंग इतना काम नहीं आता है। तुम मेजरली अगर रेंजेस की बात हो रही हो तो तुम बाउंड्री वैल्यू एनालिसिस लगाना ही प्रिफर करते हो। और प्रेफरेंस भी ऐसा है, व्हेनेवर यू गेट द रेंज बेसिकली ट्रांजिशन बिटवीन द रेंजेस, जो यहाँ पर देखो ट्रांजिशन हो रहा है बिहेवियर में, 0% डिडक्शन हो रहा है फिर 1% हो रहा है, तुम इन्हीं दो चीजों को बाउंड्री वैल्यू ले लो और इस पे ही बाउंड्री वैल्यू एनालिसिस लगा दो, फिर ये दो को लेके इस पे बाउंड्री वैल्यू एनालिसिस लगा दो, ये दो को लेके इस पे बाउंड्री वैल्यू एनालिसिस लगा दो। ये ज्यादा इम्पैक्टफुल होगा rather देन प्रिसमेंस अप्रोच। ठीक है, समझे मैं क्या बोला?
Yes, sir.
नहीं समझे तो मैं लिख के बताता हूँ, बताओ, डिराइव करके बताओ।
Yes, sir. Derive.
ठीक है, तो देखो फर्स्ट बाउंड्री वैल्यू एनालिसिस में ये जो ये ट्रांजिशन रेंज दी हुई है ना, इसी के ऊपर लगानी है हमको। तो पहला हमारा सिनेरियो हो जाएगा 99 बिकॉज a माइनस 1 है, मतलब 100 माइनस 1 99, 100 एंड देन 101 एंड देन अपर रेंज के लिए हो जाएगा 999, 1000, 1001। गेटिंग माय पॉइंट? सो दिस विल बी योर अपर रेंज एंड देन फिर 1001 के लिए, 1001 के लिए सबसे पहले हो जाएगा 1000 एंड देन 1001 एंड देन 1002। अब देखो इस पे जो रिपीटेड है उसको एक बार रख लो, इस पे जो रिपीटेड है उसको एक बार रख लो और बेसिकली इसी तरीके से डिराइव करते जाओ। समझ रहे हो? तो इससे क्या होगा, तुम इस पर्टिकुलर ट्रांजिशन वैल्यू को भी टेस्ट कर पाओगे और वैल्यू के आगे और पीछे की भी टेस्ट कर पाओगे कि सही से ट्रांजिशन हो रहा है कि नहीं हो रहा है। तो ये पर्टिकुलर सिनेरियोस, ऐसे जब सिनेरियो डिराइव करोगे विद द हेल्प ऑफ बाउंड्री वैल्यू एनालिसिस, देन इट विल बी मोर इम्पैक्टफुल rather देन द प्रैक्टिस वाला कॉन्सेप्ट, बिकॉज उसमें बहुत सारी रेंजेस है और बहुत सारी चीजों को तुम टेस्ट करोगे ना, तो वो एक ही कोड को बार बार जाके टेस्ट करना होगा, ओवर टेस्टिंग पे आएगा। तो बेटर देन दैट यू जस्ट implement boundary value analysis on these transition range and try to derive scenarios. ठीक है? Yes, no, anything?
Yes, sir.
और ऐसे ही करके तुम इसके लिए करो, फिर इसके लिए करो, फिर इसके लिए करो, फिर इसके लिए करो एंड देन जो डुप्लीकेट है उनको हटा दो, एक बार ही टेस्ट करो एंड देन यू विल बी श्योर इनफ टू से दैट कि हाँ ये पूरे रेंज मैंने अच्छे से टेस्ट कर ली। So for me, if you ask about me, even though there is a transition in the range, I will pick up the transitioning point and I will apply boundary value analysis and I'll say that yeah, testing is done. I can say the testing is done. Okay. Coming up to more important part, which is your test case review process. Test case review process में क्या होता है? Test case review process में very simple process, right? You write the test case, you mail it to reviewer. Reviewer review the test case. Once he did the review, he'll find mistakes in your test case like extra implemented scenario, duplicate scenarios, or missing scenarios or wrong scenarios. So he will give you review comment again. Once he give you review comment, you will modify your test case. ठीक है? Modify करने के बाद you will send the test case to reviewer again. Once reviewer see the updates and check everything looks fine, he will give you, he will tell the lead that you have done the job, I have reviewed it, it looks good to me. Now reviewer lead will again do what, one round of review and then give you the approval. This is the whole process. Every time you send test engineer send a mail for review to reviewer, he will CC lead. Every time the reviewer is sending mail to the test engineer, the author of the test case, he will also CC lead. That's the rule to make you make this lead recognize that you have done your job. Okay? Yes,
Sir,
no, anything?
who is the reviewer? Is there a position in every company
No,
as a reviewer?
no. You can review other person's test case. Other person can review your test case. ठीक है?
So he is just another
Colleague.
tester.
हाँ, he'll be your teammate only.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So where is that test case format? It should be here. It's yeah, this is the test case format. अब देखो टेस्ट केस फॉर्मेट का कोई हार्ड एंड फास्ट रूल नहीं है कि ऑल ओवर द वर्ल्ड विल यूज वन फॉर्मेट. It will vary from company to company, even though you will see that in your company itself one project is using different format, another project is using different format. So format will vary, but we'll cover whatever mostly it is being mentioned in the test case. ठीक है? So first thing you have to mention is your test case name. Give a relevant name. ऐसा नाम मत देना जो टेस्ट केस पढ़ के किसी को समझ में ना आए कि वो क्या है, किस चीज का टेस्ट केस है. ठीक है? So mostly you will see the naming convention like this. You will first give the project name, then module name, and then what type of test case you are writing on. You can see it here. Example, Gmail. Under Gmail we are writing on inbox. Under inbox we are writing functional test case. This could be a test case name. Then requirement number. On what particular requirement number you have to write, you have written your test case. That requirement, every time you have to mention the requirement. If it is in Jira, you have to mention the link, but you have to mention the requirement from which you are writing the test case. Okay, got it? Then comes test data. This is very important. Test data are exactly those credentials or types of credentials you are using to do the testing in this particular test step. अगर मैं टेस्ट स्टेप पे लिख रहा हूँ कि try to log in with manager type user ID and password, I need to mention the same thing in the test data part. In order to execute this test case, you will need what? You will need a manager type user ID, manager type password here. Getting my point? So why we are doing this stuff in header? Because when the person opens up the test case, he might not have the time to go through each and every step of the test case. He needs to see the header and try to understand what exactly is happening in the body. Because test step might be of 20-30 steps. The person might not have that amount of time to go through the test case and try to understand what test case says. Rather than that, he'll just go through the header and try to understand what is happening. Getting my point? So that's why we need to mention here in test data section what all types of credentials we are using. User type test data, manager type test data. Even though it is not mandatory to write or mention the exact user ID and password, this you can mention manager type user ID and password, a generic way. Because maybe when you are writing the test case in January, you have mentioned the test data here, ABC underscore something something. And the person who is doing the regression testing is testing at the December. Meanwhile, the test data got expired, so he'll be blocked. He'll need to find another data for that. So better than that, better than wasting time in going and logging in by a wrong user ID or expired user ID and password by the test engineer, we'll try to do what? We'll try to make it generic. हम लोग just manager type user ID and password लिख देंगे. लिटरली लिखेंगे, मतलब ऐसा मत समझना कि मैं डेटा लिखूंगा. यहाँ पर तुम लिखोगे जस्ट मैनेजर टाइप यूजर आईडी एंड पासवर्ड एंड यूजर टाइप यूजर आईडी एंड पासवर्ड. You will not mention the exact user ID abc at that it's something like that. Okay, so you will not mention in that way. So you will mention it in a generic way so that the user will get the understanding क्या चाहिए and he can arrange, executor can arrange. Okay, then comes precondition. Now precondition is a condition which needs to fulfill before we start executing our test case. जब टेस्ट केस जो भी एग्जीक्यूटर एग्जीक्यूट कर रहा है, ये कंडीशन फुलफिल होनी चाहिए बिफोर ही स्टार्ट्स एग्जीक्यूटिंग हिज टेस्ट केस, और एल्स द पर्सन विल बी ब्लॉक्ड. ठीक है? सो प्री कंडीशन में फॉर एन एग्जांपल वी आर डूइंग द इंटीग्रेशन टेस्टिंग बिटवीन अमाउंट ट्रांसफर एंड अमाउंट बैलेंस. करेक्ट? सो व्हाट कुड बी द प्री कंडीशन देयर? Before executing the test case, executor should have at least 2 accounts. One account should have at least minimal amount to do the transfer. So this could be the precondition. Getting my point? So what is precondition? Precondition is that condition, those conditions basically which needs to be fulfilled before you start executing your step 1 of the test case. Got it?
Yes, sir.
Cool. Now comes severity. Severity is very important. Why it is important? For an example, if you got a very less amount of time to execute a large number of test cases. For an example, there are 500 test cases. You are getting only 2 days of time to execute it. Now you know that you can't execute all 500 test cases, right? So you will pick those test cases which are severe, which has the high severity. Okay, how will you decide the severity? You got the understanding. Okay, in order to execute a test case, I will give priority to the more severe test case, but how will I decide the severity as a tester? So if you are writing test case on more critical things, if you're writing test case on login, if you're writing test case on compose, if you're writing test case on send item or calendar, these are more critical feature itself. So the test case will be also more critical in order to basically test. If you're writing test case on feedback, that would be less critical, less severe. Why? Because if that functionality got broken, it will not impact the rest of the functionality of the software, more critical functionality of the software. So depending upon what feature you are writing on the test case, and basically what is the level of severity of the functionality itself, you'll rate the functionality here, you'll rate the severity here. Okay, got it? You can either mention high, medium, low, that would be fine. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Cool. अब आते हैं टेस्ट केस पे, टेस्ट केस टाइप पे. टेस्ट केस टाइप विल डिस्क्राइब बेसिकली क्या टाइप ऑफ टेस्टिंग तुम कवर कर रहे हो इस पे. दिस इज नॉट वाइडली यूज्ड. You basically don't widely mention what type of test case it is, but sometimes yeah you do. Mostly on smoke testing, and most smoke test cases you used to write this is a smoke testing test cases, because that's a very frequently used test case by everyone, so it should reflect there. So basically test case type will indicate what type of testing you are covering in integration test case, system test case, functionality test case, smoke test case, sanity test case, regression test case, etc, etc. Okay, that you have to mention. This is the most important thing in the test case. Why am I saying most important thing? This will describe in one line what you are covering inside your test case. This is the basically scenario, high level scenario of the test case. This one liner brief description will tell the viewer of this particular test case that what exactly you have covered in all these particular steps inside the body. Okay, so you have to just describe in one line what you are testing in this particular test case. So you can see an example here. Inbox is receiving mail or from compose or not. This is one liner description which describes that we are doing an integration testing from compose to inbox, and we are trying to test whether the mails are being received or not. Yes or no? Guys got it?
Yes, sir.
So this is one line description. Assume that you have to go through 10 test cases and you have to analyze what things are being covered. If there is no brief description here, there is no brief description here, so in order to understand what exactly is being covered, you have to go through each and every step and try to understand what the test case is saying, and then you have to decide that okay, yeah, this is happening in this particular test case, right? But if they have brief description, you can just go through the brief description of each test case, all the 10 test case, and you get to know that what is covering, right? So that's why it is important. It saves a lot of time. Okay, this is all about header. This is all about header. These are the things which is there in the header. Then comes your body. What is most important thing? Why? Because your actual testing things are here in the body itself, right? You will write serial number, basically serial number is 1 2 3 4 5 6, something like that. You number each and everything. Why? Because when the reviewer will review your step, and if you have done the mistake in a specific step, he can mention the number. Step number 4, you have done this mistake. You can exactly go to that spot and do the updation or modification. That's why it is needed. Okay, also while giving number, it will be quantified, because if you have to do the execution of one test case that has 20 steps, you can see the serial number is saying 20. You can estimate the amount of time you will invest in execution of that particular test case. Getting my point? If it is 50, it will take more time. But if it is just roughly the paragraph kind of form, you will not be able to estimate it. It will be not quantified. Okay. Then comes description. Description, steps, or you also call it as actions. Okay, sometimes. So these are multiple names, but this will exactly have that particular step which the tester who is executing this particular test case needs to follow, needs to do in the software. Try to understand what I'm saying. I'm repeating it one more time. This section will have exactly that particular step, that particular action which the tester needs to do in the software. Okay. So if we are writing in this way, right? Open the browser, enter the URL www.gmail.com. So this particular thing will be there under description, action, whatever you call it, or steps. Basically it will be there, it will be here. Then will be second step, login. You'll be writing the input. You'll not give any kind of input apart from this URL. So you'll mention the URL www.gmail.com here, and expected result is that basically on doing this, on entering the URL and hitting the go button, the expected result is login page should be displayed. Correct. So you will, the tester will do what, the person who is executing this test case, he'll read out the description, go to the browser, enter the URL, hit the go button. He'll pick the URL from input, enter the URL to the browser, hit the go button, and check whether the expected result is matching the actual thing which is saying on the screen or not. Getting my point? So this is how they will execute. So each and every step will be mentioned here. And if I am entering second step, under the user ID and password, enter valid user ID and valid password, right? And hit the login button. This will be your second step. Under input, you can mention the valid user ID and valid password for the executor, so that he can do what? He can pick up the data and he can enter the data. Or else the more preferable thing is to mention it in a generic way. You can just write valid user type user ID and valid user type password, so that he can search around the data from his end, the valid data of that particular period, that particular time. Because if you mention the exact data here, ABC user ID and 123 password, there might be chances the person who is executing this particular test case that time, he might get that this particular data is not now expired. Now he's in between the execution. He need to came out of the execution, search for the data first, and then arrange the data, and then come back and then continue with the testing. If you mention it in a precondition, we'll go through the precondition first and then arrange the data, and then basically come to this particular test case and try to basically do the execution. And that time, if you mention here in the input section valid user type user ID and password, we'll just pick that data and execute. Getting my point?
Yes, sir.
Cool. Now basically the second step of execution is basically what? Here you will mention that home page should be displayed as you have entered valid user ID, valid password. Now there is one more thing which is called actual result, status, and comment. What is actual result? Actual result you will fill only if you see that something is mentioned in expected result and you are not seeing the same thing in the application. These three things, first of all, will be filled by the executor, not the test case creator. These three things are for executor. So if I am the creator, I will just fill these four fields. These four fields I will do what? I will fill. Then I'll send it for the review. Review will happen. I'll get the approval. Now this particular test case will be pulled by an executor who is actually testing the software. Read out the states, read out the action, description, expected result, try to test the application. If expected result is not matching the actual behavior, for an example, now home page should login page should be displayed, but you are not seeing the login page on the very first step. So basically you will give the status as fail, and you will put the actual result as what? Basically not able to see the not able to see the login page. Home page is being displayed. You can mention it here. The executor can mention it under the actual result, and if he wants to mention any comment, he can mention it here. Now basically test step status of that particular step can be either pass or fail. If it is wrong, then it will be fail. If you see the different behavior in the application and the expected result is different, we'll mention it as a fail. If it is same, we'll mention it as a pass. That time, if you are mentioning it as a pass, you need not to mention actual result. Got it?
Sir, this test case report is generated by the test engineer.
Yes.
And then it will be sent to whom?
If it is done, you have done the testing, you have updated the actual result and status and everything, it will be stored in the repository, the same repository. Execution will be there, and then basically there will be a different folder called execution. There you will execute and you will basically do what, do update the status that this particular test case is pass or fail. And then basically right after that, after the rounds of execution, when all the test cases are passed, you will create an execution report and then send it to the client. Your test case might not be sent after execution. You will send these test case before execution. Matlab, you will not send the execution wala test case. You will send the basic test case which is there, which has this description, input and expected result, which is not these things will not be filled in there. Okay, this is something internal. But ये जो बाकी सारी चीजें होती हैं, ये तुम किसको भेज देते हो? क्लाइंट को भेज देते हो साइन ऑफ के साथ. ठीक है.
Sir, initially when you were telling us how to raise a bug in Jira, at that time we are also creating a bug report.
Correct.
So that was different from this.
Yeah, this is test case, right? डिफेक्ट रिपोर्ट इज होलिस्टिकली डिफरेंट. अभी तुम देखोगे कि लॉगिन पेज दिखना चाहिए एंड यू आर सीइंग होम पेज, यू आर मार्किंग दिस टेस्ट स्टेप एज फेल. ठीक है. एक्चुअल रिजल्ट में लिख रहे हो तुम लोग की यहाँ पर होम पेज दिख रहा है, लॉगिन पेज नहीं दिख रहा है. एक्सपेक्टेड में लिखा था लॉगिन पेज दिखना चाहिए, बट करंटली आई एम सीइंग होम पेज. तुम क्या करोगे? ये पूरा टेस्ट केस एग्जीक्यूट करोगे, उसके बाद ये टेस्ट केस को बंद करोगे, डिफेक्ट रिपोर्ट क्रिएट करोगे कि देयर इज अ डिफेक्ट, this is the details of that particular defect, the steps to reproduce. समझ रहे हो? Defect report is holistically different from this particular test case. Test case is for execution, and it will do the actual testing. With the help of this, the tester will do the actual testing. If he finds that something is not working according to that particular test case, he will create a defect report. Got it?
Sir, like when we get a build, we test it and
Yeah.
we raise a bug in Jira using that bug report format.
Yes.
So
Correct.
in which case we are using this format of test case? I mean,
This
when we will
format,
use this?
when
I'm not
yeah,
getting that.
correct. I'll tell you. Basically, you will derive scenarios, right?
Yes.
Right after that, you have to document your test case. I'll open up on, I think you missed that particular class or what, but I'll open up the integration testing for you so that you get the understanding कि कैसे करना है. You remember when we are studying integration testing, I gave you a format, this
Yes,
format.
sir.
So this is the test case. When I taught you that there is one scenario composed to inbox, you have to document a test case out of it. So this is a step-by-step document wherein you have mentioned serial number, action or description or expected result. This is exactly the test case. Right after deriving in the scenarios, you have to document the test case, get it reviewed. Once the review is done, you will get the approval. Once the approval is done, one test engineer will execute this test case. Once the execution is done, you will raise a defect. Because without executing,
Yes,
without
yes.
testing, how will you raise a defect? Correct?
Yes, sir.
So this is how it happens.
So before raising a bug, we will create test case format.
Test cases.
And after
with the help
getting
of
approval,
format.
then we will proceed.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Everyone got that? Anyone has any kind of confusion in the process? Yes, no, guys, anything?
No, sir.
Cool. So basic idea is that initially you'll get the requirement, understand the requirement, analyze the requirement, derive the scenario. After deriving the scenario, prepare the test case. After preparing the test case, get it reviewed. After getting reviewed, we'll do the execution. We'll do the actual testing. After testing, you'll get the bugs. You'll create a defect. Got it?
Yes, sir.
Cool. So there is two parts basically. This part, this first half of the body will be filled by the author, the person who is creating the test case. Correct? this serial number, description, input, and expected result will be filled by whom? The author of the test case, the one who is creating the test case. Once this particular thing is done, once the review is done, then the another person or the same person might execute this test case. Execute means basically follow the test case and do the testing in the application. Correct? So why we exactly create this particular test case is to collect the scenarios in one particular document. And why we mention this expected result is basically so that the person need not to go again and again to the requirement while execution. समझ रहे हो? अगर यहाँ पर लिखा हुआ है enter valid invalid type, enter more than 10,000 amount, and there is no expected result in there. In amount text field, enter more than 10,000 amount, and there is no expected result. So how will how will the executor get to understand कि क्या behavior होना चाहिए software में? If he needs to confirm, he again has to go through the requirement. Correct? So to avoid that process, we write expected result. So the executor who is executing this particular test case, who is doing the actual testing, he can just go through the step. He can just go through the expected result. If anything is not working as per the expected result, he can mention that step as a fail and actual result as a whatever he sees in the application, and then create a bug. समझ गए? Yes, no, anything?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Cool. So this is all about test case format. The last thing is basically your footer. अब देखो footer क्या होता है? Footer has 3-4 things: author name, approved by whom, the basically mostly you'll see here कि test lead का नाम होगा, and reviewed by whom, who is the reviewer of this particular test case. The author is basically who created the test case, approver who gives the approval to the test case, reviewer who reviewed this test case and approved it. Got it?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Cool. तो अब ये पूरा टेस्ट केस का फॉर्मेट समझ में आ गया तुमको, सिनेरियो डिराइव करना आता है तुमको, करेक्ट?
Yes, sir.
टेस्ट केस लिखने का रेफरेंस तुम इंटीग्रेशन टेस्ट केस वाली स्लाइड से देख लेना कि तुम कितना डिटेल में स्टेप लिखना होता है. अब मेरे को एक असाइनमेंट करके दो, लाइक इसको थोड़ा जेन्युइनली और थोड़ा सीरियसली करना, सब करना, और क्योंकि ये थोड़ा हेल्पफुल होगा तुम्हारे आगे चलने पे. आगे चल के तुम्हारे दो ही चीजें तो होती है. देखो, I would say that if you are a tester, what makes you a quality tester is basically how quality scenario you derive and how properly you can document your test case. These are the two qualities of a tester which makes a tester a good tester. So if you are working on this, mostly you will be performing good in your organization. Okay? So you already know how to write scenarios. You have to understand how to formulate in this test case format. Okay? So refer your integration testing slide and refer this format, and just give me one beautiful test case out of any software you want, out of any scenario, out of any functionality. ठीक है? कोई भी लाइव सॉफ्टवेयर ले लो, कोई भी फंक्शनैलिटी ले लो, और एक टेस्ट केस लिख के लाओ जिसपे सारी चीजें हो और जिसपे ये दिखे कि हाँ तुमको अंडरस्टैंडिंग है. ठीक है? यस, नो,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
सब करके लाना. एक दिन का गैप है, कल फ्राइडे है, विल हैव हॉलीडे, सैटरडे विल मीट एंड विल चेक. ठीक है?
सर टेस्ट
Yes, sir.
सिनेरियो और टेस्ट केस सर.
टेस्ट केस प्रॉपर ये फॉर्मेट पे टेस्ट केस लिखना, स्टेप बाय स्टेप लिख के लाना. ठीक है? अगर तुम व्हाट्सएप का डीपी चेंज करने का टेस्ट केस लिख रहे हो कि डीपी चेंज हो रही है कि नहीं हो रही है ये टेस्ट करने के लिए, तो राइट ईच एंड एवरी स्टेप. Write prerequisite. You should have a picture in your mobile device so that you can change a picture, something like that, right? Or you can write an in-depth test case. You can change the photo in two ways, right? Either by clicking the picture by then and there, or by uploading a picture from gallery. So basic idea is that try to derive scenarios, try to take a functionality, derive scenarios, and document a proper test case, step by step test case. Open WhatsApp, click on setting button, click on profile picture, click on edit, something like that, right? Each and every step. Got it?
Yes, sir.
ये वाला
Yes,
कर लेना, सभी करके लेके आना. I'll check. We'll invest good amount of time on Saturday and we'll check everything कि कहाँ तुम लोगों से गलती हो रही है. This one is important. ठीक है?
Yes, sir.
चलो ठीक है.
सर PDF इसका
हाँ, PDF नहीं मिला है.
नहीं सर.
Thanks for reminding यार. मैं भेजता हूँ. क्या था
Yes.
टेस्ट केस का 2 PDF भेजना है ना मेरे को।
Yes, sir.
2 मिनट में भेज रहा हूँ। आप सेंड इट, ठीक है, देख लो, कोई दिक्कत होगी तो बताना कहीं पे भी, ठीक है।
Okay, sir.
चलो ठीक है,
Thank you, sir.
थैंक यू एवरीवन।